You're watching Faith and Reason, a discussion about God, politics, and pop culture. From the perspective of our pastors, who are not afraid to tackle and ask the hard questions. A Christian talk show for those on a spiritual journey. This is Faith and Reason.
Good evening. Welcome to Faith and Reason, a show that looks at issues that are going on in today's society in light of the Word of God. I'm Pastor George Crespo from First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park, and with me as always, Pastor Rick Spence from Fort Lee Gospel.
Hello.
Welcome.
Yes.
Today we want to do a special. Just a few days ago, Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, very well-known celebrity, phenomenal boxer indeed, passed away, and certainly has struggled many years with Parkinson's, and he had been loved and admired, and surely there was some controversy around him as well, but nothing that I guess overwhelmed his personality and who he was and what he accomplished. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to jump in and get to have a greater look at this man and what he accomplished and what he meant to people. So maybe we could start by maybe looking at why was Muhammad Ali so well loved by people?
Yeah, well, it starts with the fact that he was a great boxer. I mean, if he was not talented, if he was not successful in the ring, he wouldn't have become who he became. But then that was added to the fact that his legacy outside of the ring endeared him to many people as he took multiple stands, which history proved him more right than wrong on many of the issues he took. So, without getting into all the details, I think that the controversial 22-year-old heavyweight champion grew into someone who was very iconic and arguably he's right up there with the most respected people on the globe. It was maybe the best recognized individual through much of the second half of the 20th century, and as someone put it, he may have been the most revered man on the planet, second only to Nelson Mandela in South Africa. He was right up in that kind of global status, and as someone said, if he was in any room, he was the star. It could be a room filled with heads of state. It could have been a room filled with athletes. But he always rose up and became the star. So, and of course, we're ministers and we look at things through a religious prism. So I think, the part of the religious story will come out in this program as well, as he was obviously a Muslim, and that's a part of it.
I think the enjoyable thing about him was, again, not only being great in the ring, but the fact that he was this very jubilant personality, that he could make you laugh. I mean, when I think of him, I think, in the ring, he was, again, I find him to be, being someone who grew up in the culture of watching a lot of boxing, it was just amazing to watch him, the things that he went through, the way he just prevailed. But outside the ring, he was just as entertaining. I mean, the guy could have taken a career in like comedy and been just as great because he was, And then again, when he made even, today when you see boxers, I don't know, if you watch boxing, but they have this whole machismo thing going on and trying to, I'm going to rip your heart out, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill your village, and this guy comes across as so, jokingly, but I guess it irritates more when the guy you're supposed to battle is not taking you seriously, and he's making jokes and making rhymes, and I found that entertaining. I can't think of a boxer today that has that kind of charisma in dealing with people. Now, obviously, he was the first. I mean, he was a very outspoken Afro-American athlete. Before him, of course, there were great Afro-American athletes, but mostly trying to stay in line with the system. He didn't try to do that. Right. How did that affect him? How did that play out?
Well, I think that he, very early on, nobody knew who he was until 1964, even though he'd won some matches, since in the early 60s. But in 1964, he became the heavyweight champion, and he was a vast underdog, but he won the championship at that point. And then a couple days later, he converted to Islam and changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, and was very public about his religious endorsement. And so in many ways, he redefined the role, particularly of the African American athlete. Because if you look at the history of African Americans in this country, they were always accepted as entertainers. You know, from early on, even in the days of slavery, you could have an African American musician, an entertainer, you know, someone telling jokes. But when they use their success as a platform to stick it to white culture or protest white culture, that was problematic. And in many ways, he created a new mold for the successful African American athlete. And so he charted his own path, and it really ultimately led to his greatness, but at the time made him very controversial. And you know, as I've been listening to different interviews or things the last couple of days, you know, they said a lot of times, particularly when he protested the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, America was very divided. The World War II generation, for the most part, said, you know, what is this guy doing? He's anti-American, he's anti-military, and there was a lot of hatred towards him at that point. And at the same time, you know, the more and more time passed, you know, we look at the Vietnam War through a different lens today than they did then. You know, then it was controversial. Some people were against it, some people were for it. Today, most people would agree the Vietnam War was a poorly conceived war that we were a part of, and as much as we don't go against those who fought, we certainly are against those who led America into the war and the presidents who perpetuated the war seen in a negative light. And so there was, you know, certainly a change between then and now, and yet we can't miss the fact that what he did in the 60s and early 70s was very controversial, and he created a lot of enemies in the process.
Now his thing was because he would have had to go to war as well.
Right. Right.
So
He refused to sign.
Yeah, so I think that's what that adds more to the controversy than simply protesting it. Because I would have seen it. I mean, I know that back then the racial issue was much bigger than it is. Although it's
been reemerged. Yes.
It's coming back again. Because I mean, really, I don't like when people refer. I mean, I know he's black, but to say, oh, he's black, like somehow he's a new category of boxer. No, he's a great boxer. No matter what color or nationality you put in there, he's great.
Yes.
But I guess the issue is when you see, you know, somebody who would not fight for his country. And I guess, again, connected with the issue of Islam, I think that makes it a little more controversial. Is that what added to the spice of the whole thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. And if I can just go into Nation of Islam for a moment, this is not just becoming a Muslim, as you know, there's Christians, there's Muslims. Nation of Islam believed that the devil was the white man. That was the teaching of Nation of Islam. It's almost like, the best way to understand it, it's like a cult of Islam. Now Ali did not stay in the Nation of Islam. He was there from about 64 to the mid-70s, when he became more of a mainstream Muslim, a Sunni Muslim. But in those early days, you know, this is, you could call it, you could define it as you want, you know, Black Islam, but it really was an American, you know, form that looked at all of the prejudice against African Americans and projected and intertwined the religious aspect of Islam with a hatred towards white people. So, so to say he just became a Muslim, I mean, that, you know, it's almost like today. He said he converted to becoming a part of ISIS, and he was still fighting. And I mean, maybe that's not a fair analogy, but it's close. It's close.
Not as radical.
Well, I mean,
they're not doing terrorist acts right now.
Well, they were doing terrorist acts in the 60s.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
So there wasn't, you know, again, and there was an emergence. So, I mean, to say he's not a part of a Nation of Islam today. He developed from that to Sunni Muslim, and even in the later years more Sufi Muslim, which is more the spiritualism and.
Well, I'm glad you made that distinction, because that was what I was a kid in the 70s, and I never saw any kind of animosity in him. And you know, you saw him.
Right.
Most of the time, you're being interviewed. You're not being interviewed by a black person. You're being interviewed by white people.
Yes.
You know, and his whole chemistry with Howard Cosell was
Yeah,
like.
right.
But
Yeah,
again,
they made each other.
They were great, man. They were great.
Yeah.
They could have gone on the
Yeah.
road with that. With that.
Of
But
course.
you didn't see hatred and animosity
Yes, yes.
from him.
Right.
You saw a very jubilant type character who enjoyed the spotlight and really wasn't. He really wasn't acting. He really enjoyed being around people and doing things he was doing, and that really came across. I guess growing up, as a kid, those issues would not have been issues for me, unless he would have made them issues.
Right.
Unless he had come out and verbally said something abusive or hateful, which I'd never recall from him in that time period. You know, so.
Yeah, but again, I think to understand it in the context of when it happened, I think Muhammad Ali had an extremely outgoing personality. He was very likable, and yet at the same time he had Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad, who was the head of the Nation of Islam. They were regular people in his entourage. They were very close to him, and so if you look at the belief systems, as you look at what that was about, somehow he was able to be a part of that, but then not be associated with the hatred that was very much a part of that. And part of it, and that's the irony of who he was, is he really came to be seen as this bridge or this peacemaker or you know, this person who brought everyone together. Everybody loved him, black and white, and he's not seen as a divisive person. And so, but that, again, the history of Nation of Islam is not that likable in one sense.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit, and you know, another thing that he's well known for is the fact that he suffered from Parkinson's for 30 years of his life. How did that impact who he was and the impact that he had on the culture?
Yeah, I think when somebody suffers, it really makes their enemies have a hard time speaking out against them. I think he became a more beloved person because of his suffering. He did not become more hated. I mean, it's like you know, I mean, who insults a person sitting in a wheelchair? That's just inhumane. You don't do that. And so in the same way, the irony of it is a guy who was known for his mouth, and the Louisville Lip was one of his nicknames. He's from Louisville, Kentucky, and so you know, the guy who was so famous for his fast talking actually became silenced through the disease. And first of all, you know, he used to like speak very slowly and methodically, and then eventually, last few years, he couldn't speak at all. And so there's a real irony of it. But it did lead to him being more revered. And if I can make the parallel to Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela was beloved because he suffered in prison for so many years, and all of the injustice against him just made people revere him higher or like him more. And I think there's some parallels to what the Parkinson did. And then in addition to that, it raised the question how much of him as the boxer contributed to his Parkinson's. You know, if he would not, you know, nobody knows for sure, but if he had not taken the beating in the ring, perhaps he would have been a healthier person as he got older.
Any boxer would be healthier.
Yeah,
They don't think the
that's
beating
true.
did.
That's true.
The pounding still goes on. And obviously,
Yes.
when he was younger, the rules and regulations of boxing were very different.
They were. Yeah.
And they allowed things to go on in that ring that shouldn't allow to go in that ring.
Right,
So,
right.
and of course, that makes for a different chemistry that exists today.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we're gonna take a small break and look at a little commercial from Fort Lee Gospel, and then we'll be right back. Welcome back to Faith and Reason. So, clipping there from Fort Lee Gospel, and certainly a great place to worship the Lord, to serve the Lord. And if you're in that neighborhood, if you're near Rick's Church, go by, worship. It's a fantastic fellowship, a great pastor. So I certainly invite you there. If you're within our, what was that?
Same to you. And
if you're within our neighborhood in Cliffside Park, a few blocks the other way, and certainly we invite you to come and worship with us. We're at 777 Anderson Avenue in Cliffside Park. Our service is at 11 a.m. We don't have Sunday school during the summer, And Wednesday nights we have prayer and Bible study at 7:30 p.m. We also do have a lot of things on the web now, especially firstbaptistcp.org. You can go to Facebook. You can like us on Facebook. You can see the sermons. You can see studies. You can see our Faith and Reason programs as well. So we invite you to come out to that and learn more. We've been looking at the great Muhammad Ali and just his legacy, the greatness of what he's done. And we've discussed a number of things. And now we want to again shift gears and maybe talk about Muhammad Ali as a husband, as a father, his family life, and enlighten us more about that, because certainly that's a dark spot for me. I really don't know much about it.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, you know, the public perception of a person may not necessarily be that they were always successful personally. And let me preface this by saying that many people who had encounters with him had nothing but positive things to say. I mean, he was the kind of guy who would stop and greet the children and do all the things that you would expect a celebrity to do, and then some. But as far as family goes, he was married 4 times, divorced 3 times. The first divorce had to do with his conversion to Islam. His wife did not want to follow him into that religion and all the restrictions it put on women. And so that led to a first divorce. He had 2 sons and I believe 7 daughters. A couple of the kids born out of wedlock. So he was, you know, certainly if you look at his life honestly, you don't look to him as a role model for what a father should be, a husband should be. Yet at the same time, he was able to grow old in a way that there's not a bunch of fighting within the family, and hopefully in the weeks ahead we're not going to hear about, you know, people fighting for a slice of his wealth that he accumulated over the years. But there is, he seemed to have his family united, his children united in support of him in recent years. So you know, again, that's, you know, taking an honest look at a person. I think sometimes what we like to do with celebrities or famous people is that we project onto them what we want to see. And so because, you know, Muhammad Ali entertained us as children, because he was, you know, somebody who was seen as, you know, someone who brought peace or fought for good causes, civil rights, whatever it is, we want to project onto him other good things, that he was therefore a good husband, a good father, and yet sometimes we have to be honest. You know, he had flaws, as we all do.
Yeah, I think we never like to look at the brutality of those things, the honesty of those things. Just like in any profession, I think if you have someone like Billy Graham. Last thing you want to find out is that he had affairs, or that he had children out of wedlock, or that he was an abusive husband. But those stories are important as well, because
for the record, he wasn't. But that's.
But no, I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, as an example. Yes,
but I'm saying because I mean the chemistry of what a person is should not just simply be that you're like textbook, you know, wonderful, and all the while your children hate you because you neglect them or hated them or abused them. I think it's good to hear the whole story and to kind of accept the human being for all the strengths and weaknesses that make them who they are, rather than trying to compromise or justify or put away. Just realize the man had flaws, the man had problems.
But then, when you bring that up, it brings to mind the fact that those who are religious leaders are actually called to a higher standard. So I don't want to hear about, you know, the Pope doing something, you know, sexually immoral. I don't want to hear about, you know, we need to hear the truth. I'm not saying I'm opposed to the stories coming out, but there is a higher standard, and so, you know, when our politicians have flaws, that impacts them. When our celebrities have flaws, it maybe impacts a little less. So again, from my perspective, there's almost a scale. You expect your religious leaders to be morally upright. You expect your political leaders to be almost as good, maybe not quite. You know, you can live with a couple divorces with our political leaders, but then our celebrities, you know, they're gonna, you know, you expect a little less, but it does help. I mean, I love to hear about, you know, Denzel Washington has been married to the same woman for how many years or whatever. Those are nice stories. You know, you like to hear that.
I like to go across the board. I think that I mean, not so far as being celebrity or non-celebrity, but if the man adheres to Islam, then you want to hear that he actually lived according to tenets of his beliefs. Because if we saw it in Christianity, we saw hypocrisy of a man, let's say, as a husband you're abusive, or you're abusive toward your children or your spouse. Yeah, as a pastor is bad. I think as anybody in church is bad. I think if you're anyone in church and you declare yourself to be a Christian, and you're going home and beating up on your wife, I'm sorry. I don't think my standard should be that. Oh, I'm on a higher judgment level. No, you should be. When you stand before God, I don't think He's going to say, "Well, you were not a reverend, therefore I will excuse the fact that you beat up on your wife." So those are the things that would be. Not to say that things don't happen, but it's even then, how do you resolve them? How do you have X amount of children from different wives. How did that chemistry work out? Did you isolate them? Did you treat them with respect? Did you realize, despite the fact that you married 4 times, they're still your kids, no matter how many times you got married? I think those things are always relevant, no matter who you are. I don't like. Again, I believe in the priesthood of all believers, and that means that
there you go.
We're all under equal judgment. Again, no one's going to say, "Oh, hey, I wasn't a pastor." Like, well, who cares? Well, anything further to add, or?
No, I mean, I hear your point. I mean, we're all. We judge one another, and the word judgment is maybe a harsh term, but we all respond to each other based on how we live our lives, and I think how you are at home is a factor, and certainly I think there's very little impact on his legacy because of it. People.
Well, again, because there's nothing there. Unless if something comes out that's really tarnishing to his character,
right?
I think it will affect. Like Bill Cosby.
Oh, well, you're right.
You might be the most lovable individual in the world, but when we find out there's a closet full of problems, you destroyed your legacy.
That's true.
Because all this whole persona of being a wonderful man, being a wonderful father, whether on stage or off stage, it's a lie. And America does not react, and people don't react well to that immense kind of hypocrisy.
Right.
So I think it can destroy.
It does, yeah.
But obviously, in Muhammad's case, there's no issue like that.
Well,
so, not that we know
of.
Inquiring minds want to know. No. So the next, we're going to shift gears because we definitely want to talk more about his Muhammad Ali's religious beliefs, which you have briefly touched upon, and also we have about 5 minutes, so we definitely want to bring this in. And how does that affect the fact, again, how we view him? We live in a culture, especially that's become very anti-Muslim. There's a lot of animosity towards Muslim people, in some ways rightfully so because of the connections we make with September 11, in some ways unrightfully so because we're lumping everybody together. How does that affect, well, tell us about his beliefs and tell us how's it worked out that he's not viewed that way?
No, I find that's a fascinating part of the story, and again, that America would have one of its most loved individuals be a Muslim, someone born and raised Christian who became a Muslim. Not that he was necessarily what we define as a practicing Christian, but clearly he was raised in the church, and in his early 20s he converted to Islam, and so here it is. One of the stories that came out right after his death is, Donald Trump, one of the individuals who wants to be the next president of the United States, tweeted something positive about Muhammad Ali, which is appropriate, and there was a whole firestorm on Twitter because this is the one who wants to ban Muslims from entering the country, and one of the last public responses that Muhammad Ali was attached to was criticizing Donald Trump for his stand against Muslims in the last few months. So there was a backstory there, and it's sad. And listen, as a religious person, obviously I'm not a Muslim. I don't believe that Islam is a religion that I would want people to convert to. As a Christian, I preach Jesus Christ, and I preach the gospel of coming to faith in Him. And yet, at the same time, I want religious freedoms that apply to all religions. And some of the anti-Muslim rhetoric in our country is problematic. And I think there is we need to be honest. Where there is terrorism, and to the credit of Muhammad Ali, he spoke out against Islamic terrorism as well in the last couple of years. And so we need to be careful. Not every Muslim is the same. Not every Muslim is is driven by the same religious ideology, just like every Christian is not the same. And so he became a great spokesman for Islam, and I think we're going to hear more of it this week. There's going to be a lot of the Muslims are speaking out about how he was an inspiration to them. The other African American Muslims, talk about someone, he's someone they looked up to, and a big part of our culture in America is that Islam has made significant inroads, particularly in African American communities in the last 50 years. And that is a story that he's a part of, and we have to be honest about, yes.
Well, I'm curious because, as we're getting close to wrap up, one of the things I'm very curious about, I heard that his service is going to be a mixed service, and by that it means religiously. So I unless you can enlighten me why that is the case, because I would think if you're a Muslim, they're going to do your service in a mosque, not in a cathedral.
Yeah.
And why would they involve any Christian aspect into it when you are not Christian, you're a Muslim? I would think that what they would do would be, I've never seen a Muslim funeral, so I don't know what it entails, but I'm sure it does not entail reading the Hebrew scriptures or the Christian scriptures or saying Christian prayers, or having a priest there or anyone like that, or a rabbi. But so I'm very curious. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, a quick response is I understand that on Thursday will be the private service, and on Friday will be the public service. So I would anticipate that there would be more of an Islamic funeral on Thursday, and more of, this is a cultural icon that we're burying, and I've heard names like Bill Clinton associated to, speaking at his funeral service probably on Friday. And so one interesting note that I came across in just looking at this is that there was someone covered the story of the church of his parents church in Louisville, Kentucky. They honored him in Sunday, they talked about him being a great American, and again, he's the favorite son of their city. So it's an interesting dilemma. You say, okay, but he's not your religion. He's he left your religion to go to another one. But again, I think his personality was bigger than all that.
Well, we're running out of time, so we hope that you enjoyed the show, and certainly a memory of a great man. God bless you.
Thank you for watching Faith and Reason. Please join us again next week. We invite you to visit our pastors at one of their churches, Pastor Rick Spence at Fort Lee Gospel Church, or Pastor George Crespo at the First Baptist Church in Cliffside Park. Check out our websites for more information.